Oh,
Hello, Brendan. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And if I can, before I introduce myself and get into the questions, I just want to say, while listening to you introduce the product, I was thinking how it's so important to hear about the product directly from the people who are developing it, instead of just to rely on information that you find on website. Because the way you explain it now and the way that you've initially explained it to me, like I get to clearly and simply understand the mechanism behind Tectum and what makes it so unique, what makes it so valuable. So thank you for that. And also in your
thank
introduction,
you.
you mentioned retailers and how this product could serve to them. And I think this is the main reason why I'm so happy to be discussing these legal implications of Tectum with you, because I also see a huge application of it in retail industry. And in the company where I work, retailers are my primary clients. So
Mm,
I'd absolutely love to talk about it. I think,
fantastic.
yeah, I think Brendan has said enough about me. I mean, I do legal consultancy. Web3 is in my domain of interests, along some other things, primarily also taxes, which is why I'll probably have some questions from that perspective as well. But um, maybe we can just get into it so we don't, you know, overboard it with
Sure.
introductions.
Not a worry.
Okay, um, so basically, the way I understand it, Tectum works like every other blockchain environment. Like it's a decentralized blockchain. So basically, its nodes, they can be located anywhere in the world. So that means that every transaction that takes place on Tectum blockchain, it can cross all sorts of jurisdictional boundaries across the whole globe. So basically, it can be
Hmm.
subject to conflicting legal frameworks. So how does your product ensure that you're legally compliant with all these different jurisdictions and legal regimes?
Yeah, sure. Very, very valid question. So, both Tectum and SoftNote have kind of multiple business offerings, and the two primary functions is that we've got SoftNote, and then we've also got SoftNote Swap. So they're two separate businesses. Now with SoftNote, it will be KYC and AML regulated, whereas SoftNote Swap, that's totally decentralized without any co-enterprise elements that actually link it back to Chrismind. So regarding SoftNote, all information is recorded and submitted to AML legislation in the US, which means that we have the capacity to comply with all of the legislation in the given country where the transactions are taking place. For example, we'll have MSB licenses for all of the states in the US, FCA licenses in the UK, and all the other relevant licenses for the other areas that we're operating in. With SoftNote Swap, for the US regarding fintech, FinCEN legislation states that if there are no co-enterprise elements relating to the business functioning back to Chrismind, and the company cannot seize or control the funds that are operating on the system, then the system is actually not bound by AML procedures. So SoftNote Swap functions exactly as Bitcoin and physical cash, where it's untraceable and therefore completely community controlled. So within those countries where Bitcoin and physical cash are banned, we expect that SoftNote Swap will also be banned as well.
So basically, the scope of your product is pretty huge, because I don't think there are many countries in the world where crypto is banned. Like I can think maybe around 10 off the top of my head. I think there's China, there's Egypt, there's probably India, Mexico. I think in Europe, maybe it's just North Macedonia. I think Kosovo is thinking about it. Turkey, I think, is very opposed due to the things that are happening with their economy. But uh, obviously, the application of Tectum, where it can be applied, is much bigger than where it cannot. And I think that's going to be useful to many retailers. You know, they're operating globally. So for them, it matters that they can cross these boundaries across the continent. So I think that's really amazing to hear. So there's another thing that I think I've read this claim on your website. So you say that Tectum blockchain guarantees absolute anonymity. So basically, payments are not registered in any native network ledger, and you can't trace Bitcoin transactions by a public address. So I guess what I wonder is what happens when the authorities require that transactions must be trackable. Let's say tax authorities, they may say, we need to be able to track these transactions for tax reporting purposes, for anti-money laundering purposes. So what if a specific country's tax administration, let's say, requires knowing the transaction's location?
Yeah, sure. So again, looking at SoftNote, which will be KYC, for the SoftNote model, all of the AML legislation can be abided by. All of the records and transactions can be downloaded for any user or business account. And then with SoftNote Swap, just as with cash or Bitcoin, and it's the same here in Australia, the user is actually responsible for keeping a record of their own transactions for both tax and AML purposes.
Oh, okay. So if I can add my insights on this, because I think both of your solutions respond well to the demands that I've heard exist already in the taxing realm across the world, each in their own way. But recently I was doing research about how taxes in metaverse might be incurred. So and I've learned that it's expected that they will be incurred on the basis of the physical location of the taxpayer. So clearly, if a blockchain platform is making it impossible for tax authorities to uncover, taxpayer's identity, taxpayer's location, the tax authorities, they can't impose a specific country's tax or their tax rules on them. But on the other side, what I've learned is that many tax authorities are already opting to transfer this obligation to vendors who are using blockchain. So it's more likely that the vendors will need to develop, just like you said, they'll need to develop these customer ID and data systems that will permit them to gather this real world information about their clients and so they can meet these tax payment and reporting requirements. So whether that's on the basis of billing address, their bank details, their IP addresses. So I think your solutions, each in their own way, respond to these demands, however tax authorities decide to handle it. So it's important to have these options.
Correct. And obviously, you've got to be really careful with, anything that is completely decentralized.
Yeah.
It's funny how much they track and know what's going on. You might think you're doing something that they don't have eyes on, but there's eyes everywhere. So you really have to be diligent in, keeping records of everything that you're doing, because come taxation time, if you don't declare something, it can obviously come back and bite you on the bottom. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so important to understand that even absolute anonymity has relativeness to it, however ridiculous it sounds. But yeah, while we're talking about, blockchain and its functions and the components that are used within it, I think we could maybe tackle smart contracts a bit as well, if you agree. So we know that they can be created and they can be deployed by blockchain by anyone. So what happens when a party is unable to perform their obligations under a smart contract on the Tectum blockchain? For example, due to it malfunctioning, due to malfunctioning of the smart contract, or if there are issues in transferring crypto, or if the access to Tectum blockchain is compromised. So is Tectum blockchain allowing these parties in particular to claim protection on these grounds?
Yeah, right. So the Tectum blockchain, as it relates to SoftNote model, it only allows smart contract to be created by ChrisMind, the company. So within that context, where a customer has to be KYC'd, we offer buyer protection for any non-functioning software or smart contracts. So they will be protected in that regard. And regarding the SoftNote swap model, or the Tectum blockchain as a whole, which that will be open to other developers. if a user decides to engage with a smart contract with a third-party developer, the sole responsibility for that engagement will lie with that user and the third-party developer. So in those circumstances, Tectum functions, purely as a base blockchain provider, as would be the case with like ERC20, for example.
Right. So if I understand it clearly, basically you have two different business models with different regulations to them, where you're basically offering opportunity to the buyers, your customers, to basically weigh out the benefits and risks of each before making a decision which product to use. So
Exactly right.
also,
So if you are willing to be KYC'd, then you have that buyer protection. If you want to be completely decentralized, then you're obviously running the own risk yourself.
yeah, clear, absolutely. Thank you. I think I finally started understanding the way these two separate models work.
Great.
And also another thing that another concern that I hear and see being raised often in this space is, a huge problem about blockchain platforms is that once you store data on them, that kind of data, it can be easily deleted or altered. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not easy. And for example, in the EU, because that's the legislation that I'm most familiar with, each consumer, they have the right to be forgotten. So basically they have a right to have any sort of private information removed from internet searches and all sorts of directories. So they have the right to request for their data to be deleted or altered. So does Tectum have solution for this risk, of consumer data being exposed because their transaction history is supposed to be permanent on the blockchain?
Yeah, sure. So again, that's really applicable just to SoftNote itself. So the customer's personal information, it's not stored on the blockchain. The only data that's actually stored on the blockchain itself is the softnote, the serial number, and the softnote passcode. And the personal information of the consumers is that it's KYC'd in the wallet model. That's just stored in our database, same as Binance, for example. But once a user would like us to delete their personal information from our system, it can be completely wiped. Now, of course, the data relating to the wallet, the transactional history and everything, that will still remain on the blockchain. It's encrypted in the blockchain, but the personal information will no longer be linked to that. So that'll basically just be data, but who knows who it's from once we've deleted their KYC information out of the system. So in that regard, we're not violating the GDPR legislation, etc. Basically, it's it operates the same way that that kind of medical records do, in digital-based epidemiological studies. When we look at the softnote swap model, as we've mentioned there, there's no personal information that's actually recorded, so we're not upsetting any legislation in that regard.
Yeah, okay. I understand that. And I find it interesting that you've given the example of Binance. I've actually had an opportunity to chat with them at the recent Web Summit at Lisbon in Portugal. And,
Oh, great.
they're not the only ones that I've gotten to chat with. I literally had a task of walking from stand to stand and talking to enterprises, big and small, to startups and huge retailers. And when I was talking about the future of Web3 utility and how they intend to utilize Web3 and its components, including blockchain in the future. So, they were telling me about the objectives that they want to meet. And one of the objectives that kept consistently popping up was exactly this, ensuring data safety, ensuring data privacy. And they really saw great potential for blockchain platforms there. Decentralized environments, I believe everybody knows this, but they're more resilient against things like downtime, data corruption, cyber attacks, and the way blockchain stores transaction data. It's tamper proof. So, the risk of any deliberate modifications of user data through that aren't authorized is significantly reduced as well. So, not to mention the potential of blockchain to hide any sort of personally identifiable information. So, in a way, I think it's expected from anyone that's working with this sort of technology to have at least GDPR legislation in their mind from the very beginning. And I guess that's how it was for you too, or am I wrong?
No, that's, yeah, exactly right. Correct.
Yeah, so it's amazing to hear how cautious and how companies think ahead of these things. It's great to see that you actually thought about regulating these things before launching the product. You've taken these concerns seriously, so kudos for that.
Absolutely.
And also, while we're on the topic, uh, many countries have laws where it's required that companies get explicit consent from individuals before they collect or use their data for any sort of purpose. So
Course.
how does Tectum blockchain ensure the collection and the usage and also the storage of consumer data in this situation? Do you have any sort of privacy policy? What it's like, if you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in any circumstance where we are collecting personal information and we're KYCing a customer, we do require that we get the user's consent to a privacy policy, which the privacy policy, like all privacy policies, are obviously very detailed and they go into a lot of depth, which as a someone in your profession understands, that will be much better explained by actually visiting the privacy policy, which tectum.io/privacy. All of the privacy policy details are there. So normally it's a checkbox that most people just check, but yeah, all of the further details are definitely available to dive deeper into.
Yeah, you said it so well. Oh my God. Even though I work in the legal industry, I'm always guilty for just clicking I agree with the terms and conditions. I just
You've
assume
probably
that
read
I'm
them that many.
yes, yes, and I've written a couple, and I'll say that it's a tedious work. I
Yeah.
don't envy anybody who's dealing with them, but they are absolutely important and absolutely necessary in this field of work. So again, to see that you're thinking about it, thinking about how to protect your consumers, you're not just like profit oriented. I can see that this product intends to innovate and to actually make a change for the better. And especially, I see the application being huge in the retail industry. So to hear that you're actually addressing these legal concerns is amazing for me. And I'm sure you thought about other things that I didn't think of initially or didn't include in these questions. And maybe people who are present here have their own concerns that they want to address. And I guess that's why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate with the questions that you have asked. I'll ask if there's anyone in the audience who has any questions for Nevena while we've got her here. Anyone that wants to ask anything relating to kind of law or taxation or anything like that.
I do have to admit that my taxation knowledge doesn't revolve that much around income taxes, and maybe it's mostly related to taxes in EU. And recently, I've even been dealing with taxes in crypto world. It's interesting to see how far along the regulation has come. There are huge things happening in terms of regulation of crypto space, crypto assets. In the European Union, there's this new regulation that's being introduced on the regulation of crypto assets, where basically the European Union has found a way to control the issuance of crypto assets, I think, from the next year or from 2024, I'm not sure.
Right.
But we're finally seeing this space regulated, and I see that maybe smaller companies are more afraid of this sort of regulation because they're afraid of taking over the risks and burdens that come with regulation, because it can be pretty restrictive in environments that are decentralized. But I also, on the other hand, I've talked with huge industry players and retailers, and I've asked them, so how do you feel about these upcoming regulations in this space? And they were like, oh no, legislation is our friend. We're fine with it. We'll comply with it easily. So I think legislation poses different burdens to different sized companies depending on how much burden they can take. So it'll be interesting to see how it changes space. But I don't think regulating something decentralized as necessarily terrifying or bad. I think it's I guess it's necessary to protect the consumers, and I see that you have that in mind. So that's always commendable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as much as we want a completely decentralized system, there has to be some regulation because unfortunately human nature is, greed gets the better of people and
Yeah.
people start trying to, do things that they shouldn't be doing. So there does need to be some kind of enforcement to keep people in line. And I mean, it's really just protection for everyone. So we do have a question that's come in on LinkedIn, which is, what difficulties do you see in the case of SoftNote? What taxes can it expect?
What taxes?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What difficulties do you see in the case of SoftNote, and what taxes can it expect?
mm, well, the only difficulty that I've mm, gathered that might happen is it really depends on where it might be applied. It will be difficult to apply it in systems where crypto is banned, but we've already tackled this. I don't necessarily see any issues regarding taxes because
Mhm.
the system is transparent. It works along with tax legislation. So there shouldn't be an issue as long as we're dealing with taxes in a country where crypto is allowed. So I don't think it's
Correct.
problematic
Yeah.
in that sense. And I don't know
I
if
think, yeah, in regards to sales tax and everything, like I know that they have in America, there's varying sales taxes from each state to each state. Here in Australia, we basically have a blanket. It's called GST, goods and services tax, which is just 10% that is included in any goods and services. But that will still operate in the exact same way that it does now. It's just that just because you're paying with cryptocurrency, those taxes and everything will still apply to business. They'll still
yeah,
apply in the exact same manner, whatever is relative to that country.
yeah, it's just the mechanism is slightly different. And some countries, I think primarily maybe in Europe, but they're already thinking about how they can incorporate time text reporting on the blockchain platform, build it on top of the blockchain. So I don't think there's going to be any issues with either the tax reporting or tax payments. I think authorities and legislators, they have solutions for these things. So I don't necessarily see issues with tax legislation.
Yeah, great, great. Awesome. Well, if we haven't got any other questions, guys, Nevena, you're welcome to hang around, or I'm sure you're busy. If you need to shoot off, then feel free. Huge thank you for joining us. Very grateful to have you on board and sharing your insights. It's obviously very valuable to consider all of these things and to point them out. So it obviously just gives. We have got another question here.
Okay.
Do you think that the fees we gain on soft notes will be counted as taxed as dividends, maybe? Besides, I'm thinking, what about the varying price of them over time? From my perspective, that would be the same as like interest earned, interest earned on bank accounts and things like that. Navina, what's your take on that?
I would agree with you, but also like this will depend on how a different country's tax legislation looks at these fees. They might not classify it in the same way, but I do predict that your prediction will probably be the prevalent one. So I agree. I agree.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not sure about again. It comes back to the country, but here in
Yeah.
Australia, interest earned is or like dividends, it's considered income, so it's the same as income tax. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I've seen this a lot. Like usually these sort of transactions, they are taxed in a way income taxes are treated. So I would agree. I would agree, and especially I think that's going to be the dominant way of taxing in the U.S. as well. So
mm.
that's what I
And I
expect.
guess, of course, then if you're operating as a business and you've actually minted and provided liquidity to soft notes through your business, that's going to be the same in that will be considered revenue into the business that could potentially, it'll
Yes,
be pre-tax revenue. So
yes, I
again,
agree.
whatever applies in your country, it'll just be the same as what the fiat system is.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate for vendors who are operating globally. They'll have to really know and understand these different tax systems. But it is what it is. You know, if you're doing business, you have to be prepared for this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The more you know, the safer you are, right?
Exactly. So, you know, invest in knowledge, invest in good consultants on different
Mm,
areas of law that you need. I'm not promoting my services, but I see the issues that my clients have because they've been refusing for so long to, you know, pay the consultancy services for something that they're not able to gather themselves. Because if you have a retailer who's operating across different continents and like hundreds of countries, they can't keep track of all these regulations by themselves. They need somebody who's specialized. It's a
mm.
niche topic. So, you know, invest in resources and knowledge if you have to outsource. So I guess that's something.
Absolutely. And the funny thing about that is that, and it's something I've realized myself is not only can that potentially, you know, kind of cost you more money in the long run if you know
Yeah,
you're hesitant in paying for these services, but the stress as well. Like when you don't know and you're in the dark about things and you're trying to do things yourself and the time that you put into that, and then all of a sudden you end up going, do you know what? I need to get some help, and you pay for some help. It's just this weight off your shoulders and you're like, why didn't I do this ages ago? You know?
exactly.
So it's the stress and the money that you can save. It's just priceless, I think.
Yeah, you come to an understanding that you could have spent all of that time and all of that energy and effort in doing the thing that's primarily surrounding your business instead of just worrying about these side things that are of course important and essential to your business, but they're not primarily what you're dealing with. So I absolutely
Mm,
agree.
yeah, awesome, awesome. Thanks again. Appreciate your insight, Nevena. As I said, you're welcome to hang around. We probably haven't got too long left. We'll run over a few other bits and pieces, and then we'll have our competition. But yeah, feel free to get on with your day. And thanks again for joining us.
No, thank you. And if any of your guests, if anybody who's present here ends up having additional questions, of course, they can find me at LinkedIn, same name. So I'm always here to help. Glad that I got a chance to participate and enjoy the rest of the session.